Hello there, parents, and welcome to our Friday awards program and showcase this afternoon. Very glad to have you all joining us. Very happy that we could have this time this afternoon. It's really exciting for us here during this week to see your kids make all of this progress. So one of my favorite times during the week is to show off to you the children and the work that they've been doing, to see the amazing accomplishments the students have been able to achieve, and to see exactly what they've been able to do over just 4 days of work on learning how to debate, learning how to make arguments and speeches. So we'll be very excited to show you what they'll be doing in our showcase. And then we'll also be presenting awards here so that your children can be recognized for all of their accomplishments that they've had this week. Before I go any further, as you may be able to see on your screen, my name is Jonathan Savoy. I was the face behind some of the emails that you received this week. And I was also your student senior instructor here in Debate 201. I was very excited to go into this week. Debate 201 is one of my favorite things to teach. I was a debater myself competitively when I was in high school, loved it to death. Very, very happy to continue sharing the gift of debate to other students as well, and specifically your kids over the past week. I was also assisted by my lovely assistant, Adrienne Hopt. Adrienne has worked with me in the past. I know that she's very qualified. She's done a great job coaching and teaching your kids this week. So I want to thank Adrienne for all of the work that she has done over the past week to help grow your students, to help grow your kids in their abilities to communicate and express themselves, and to argue and advocate for their ideas that they have prepared, which you will be seeing shortly. So I want to give Adrienne a brief chance to share her thoughts on this week and how things have gone with your students.
Hi, everyone. Well, it was definitely a joy to work with each and every one of these students. And I cannot lie, we did have a lot of technical difficulties this week. That just comes with doing this online, transferring camp online, and lots of different factors play into that. But I must say that considering all of the pitfalls and the roadblocks, we were able to make it through this week. And I hope that you will be very pleased with the progress that your children made, because you have every reason to be proud of them. It is so amazing how in just 5 days, students can go from barely knowing public speaking, barely knowing debate at all, maybe dabbling with it a little bit. And then by the end, they're running full debates, competitively holding their own and doing well, being able to present their ideas well, confidently, and express their ideas very well as well. So I'm just very thankful that we were able to work with them this week, and I hope that maybe one day we'll be able to work with them again, maybe even meet y'all in person. That would be fantastic. But anyways, let's get on with the show.
Thank you, Adrienne. I want to echo what Adrienne just said about how much work and accomplishment has gone into this week. All of these students have put in a lot of time and effort into making sure that their speeches were ready and as good as they could be. A lot of revising, research into preparing their ideas. The students have accepted the coaching that Adrienne and I have been giving them throughout the week, and the advice that we've tried to share with them as much as possible. These students have been working on their response skills, their refutation skills. They've worked on cross-examination skills. They've worked on how to condense an entire half-hour, 35-minute, 40-minute debate down into a 2-minute closing speech to try to sway someone to vote for their side and choose them as the winner. So there really has been a lot that has gone into this week that we want to recognize your children for. And to do that, we want to make sure that we recognize each of them individually. So at this time, we'll move into presenting some virtual certificates for your students and what they've accomplished. Here you can see the whole group all together. This was the bunch we had this week. And the first of them that we want to recognize today, when the slide presents here, The first of them is Akshay Mandari. Now, Akshay is unable to be with us today, unfortunately, but we still want to honor him and recognize him so that when he gets to see the recording of this program, he'll know that we appreciated all the hard work and effort he put into this week. Akshay has done a great job. He's been with me since last week in public speaking camp, and he has been working very hard on building his confidence, building his presentation skills. He's written two excellent speeches, two excellent debate speeches, and not only has he been working on his argumentation skills, but he's been improving in his ability to think on his feet as well. And so we want to honor and recognize Akshay for all of the hard work that he's been putting into this and all of the confidence that he's been building over the past 2 weeks. So congratulations, Akshay. Next, we have Alice Shu. Alice is one of those people who has this very contagious, infectious smile that you can see here on the screen. I remember very many times during the lessons or during the coaching sessions where I would see Alice just break out into this big grin. She just couldn't contain herself when she would smile. She's also been working very hard on her debate and argumentation skills. In fact, don't let that smile fool you, because when she gives her speeches, I tell you, she can be fierce, and she's been working very hard on her persuasive power this week. So we want to congratulate Alice on all of her work as well. Next, we have Avani Prabhu, another one of my 2-week veterans. She was with me last week as well. And it's been great to see her continually making progress in her speaking skills and in all of the things that she's been working on with her speech writing as well. She's written a great speech for this week that I'll be excited to have you hear later. But we want to congratulate Avani for making it through this week, even with all of the many technical difficulties she has had. Next, Charlie Thomas. Charlie is a very deep thinker. He's very well versed in a lot of different social issues and a lot of things that are going on in the world. We can always count on him to share his background knowledge of our topic or things that were going on during the week. And he also was great at maintaining some of the conversation in our meeting chats. So thank you, Charlie, for everything that you've done with the group this week and all the progress you've made in your arguing and your writing skills. It's been really great to see your work. Next, we have Eddie Wu. Eddie is another one of our very fierce debaters. He came in with a little bit of background experience before this week, but even Eddie has been able to improve in his writing and his prioritizing skills. We've worked on how to trim things down for time and find the most important things that you want to say so that you can not just present great arguments, but present great arguments efficiently, focusing on the most important points. So we want to thank Eddie for all of the work that he's done this week and everything that he's accomplished, which you'll get to see a taste of later. Next, we have Jack Zhang. Jack is our resident Brooklynite, and he's been a joy to have this week. He doesn't always say a lot, but when he starts talking, it's very clear that Jack has done his research. He knows what he's talking about. He's written a great speech, and he's made a lot of progress in his confidence and his ability to respond and pick arguments apart this week with refutation. So we'll be very excited to let Jack show you some of that later. But congratulations, Jack, on everything that you've done and all the progress you've made. Next, we have Kyle Zhao. Kyle has also been one of our generally quieter people this week, but I could always count on Kyle to give me a good response when I was asking questions or when we were trying to have some type of discussion. He may not always say much, but when he does speak, he has a lot of really great things to say. He has written an excellent speech this week. His opening speech was very well done, very well researched and structured. So can't wait to show that to you later. But congrats, Kyle, on everything that you've done this week. Ria Budrani. Ria has not only brought her wonderful smile and her pleasant demeanor to us this week, she's also graced us with the presence of her younger sister, Sonia, at various points throughout the week. there in her living room. So it's been very good to have the both of them throughout the week this week. So Sonia, if you're watching, we're very glad that you could join us here in Debate 201 as well. But Ria has been working very hard on not just her writing, but her response skills. She's a very good listener. She's very attentive, and she's been taking great notes during the debates and the response drills that we've been doing this week. So I want to congratulate her on how much progress she's made in her debate skills this week. Tanay Nandan. Tanay was also with me last week as well. I'm very glad to have him progress on to Debate 201 this week. He's made a lot of progress since last week. His presentation skills are continually improving, and his writing skills have even come leaps and bounds this week with his argumentation. Tanay has been really great with refutation and can give some very good closing speeches to round the debate off. So hopefully you'll get to see some of that later in our showcase. Congratulations, Tanay, on everything that you've done this week and all the progress that you built on even from last week. Now, parents, just as we have been teaching the kids how to share their voices over the past week or 2 weeks, or however many times they've come to be with us here at Capitol Debate, we always want to encourage you to share your voice as well, especially with us in the form of our parent survey, because we read each and every one of the responses you give us, and we try to use them to improve our camps. This is a new thing for us this summer, running virtual summer camps, as it has been for very many people. But we've been trying to continually hone our ability to serve you and to improve the process that we put your kids through and the process that you partner with us in. So if there are things that you perceived this week that you thought could have been done better, please let us know. If there are things that you thought went really well and you would love to see more of them, let us know about those as well by taking our parent survey. And of course, I want to encourage the students as well. I know I gave you time to do that this morning, but if you were unable to complete your student survey, I'll be sending out a link this afternoon to you in an email just to make sure that you can take that if you didn't get to finish it this morning. Of course, this week doesn't have to be the end of your journey in debate, especially not here with us at Capitol Debate. Next week, we'll be offering Debate 201, or excuse me, Debate 301, which is the next step in the progression in our summer classes from Debate 201. The students who go on to Debate 301 will be preparing themselves more to debate in a competitive context, so there'll be a lot more debating that goes on during the week, and rather than just building the fundamentals of debate, they'll actually get to the point where they can refine their skills even more and raise their competitive level up to the next step. And if you would like to take advantage of that class, or really any of the other classes that we're offering this summer here with Capitol Debate, you can use the coupon code NEXTCLASS2020 to get $50 off your next camp. That's a gift from us to you to thank you for continuing to partner with us as we try to help your children. Now, as I mentioned, there are other offerings that we have here at Capitol Debate. Debate 301 is not the only option for your kids. If you would like to try to branch out with your students and push them in other areas as well, we offer legal communication, which puts the students through a mock trial type of debate format that's similar to what goes on in courtrooms here in the United States, and it gives them some background knowledge on how to communicate effectively in a legal context. Next, business communication, which is our own Capitol version of Shark Tank, where the students learn to present their ideas and present their business concepts in an appealing way to try to get other people to come on board with them and partner with them. Interpersonal communication, covering everything from how to handle conflict in interpersonal relationships or how to do job interviews. There's so many different interpersonal skills that students can learn and benefit from by taking that course as well. And then STEM communication. STEM communication is for all those who are interested in pursuing something in the sciences and engineering or in math and technology. Being able to present your ideas, even if they're very technical and highly detailed, being able to present them in a way that's appealing, clear, easily understandable, and powerfully persuasive. So we're happy to offer those to you as well if those are things you might be interested in for your students. Now, for those of you who are looking at doing Debate 301 or maybe even Debate 401 after that this summer, or even if you're not, I would highly encourage you to consider our Club League opportunity. You might be wondering to yourself, well, what is our Club League? Is what we have here at Capital Debate for all those who would like to continue with debate during the year. Maybe your student's school doesn't offer debate as an activity. Maybe it doesn't have a team. If you join our Club League during the school year, it will allow your child to have coaches and to meet with other people during the week or on the weekends throughout the month. And on the third weekend of the month, there'll be opportunities for competition tournaments where your student can virtually compete with other students and other debaters from across the country, which not only builds their competitive skill, but it gives them even more practice with their writing, with their research. I can tell you for a fact that my time in competitive debate when I was in high school and that consistent contact with coaches prepared me more for college writing, college application, graduate school, and even the work that I have done beyond college more than anything I ever studied in high school in my English classes, and really even more than any of the writing classes that I took while I was in college. So if that's something that you would want to take advantage of, I would highly encourage you to check that out. Of course, if you're interested in more information from us here at Capital Debate about any of these opportunities, I'd love for you to reach out to us. You can email us at team@capitaldebate, and you can call us at our home office number as well. And parents, we don't want this to be the last time that you contact us. We would love for you to keep in whether it's sharing your feedback with us, reaching out for more information. We have representatives and people who are ready to connect with you and give you as much information as we can about how we can partner with you to serve your children better, to keep helping them grow as communicators, and to help them find their voices. So if you call us at 800-450-5012, we can get you connected with someone who can give you more information, or you can email us at team@capitaldebate.com. At this time, we're ready to begin moving into our showcase portion of the program this afternoon. Our very first pair of debaters this afternoon will be Charlie Thomas and Tanae Nandan. Now, before Charlie and Tanae begin, I'll ask them to join me on the screen, but I want to give a little bit of context to what we'll be doing this afternoon. So throughout this week, we've been working with the students on one topic. For those of you who were with my class last week, you might recognize it. Government regulation of social media companies does more good than harm. Each of these students wrote their own original speech this week to advocate for their own side of the topic. So Charlie will be coming to advocate for the pro side of the topic, which means he'll be agreeing with the statement, government regulation of social media companies does more good than harm. And Tanae will be speaking on behalf of the con or the contrary side of the topic, arguing against that statement, arguing that instead, government regulation really is more harmful than it is beneficial. It does more harm than good. So Charlie and Tanae, if you would join me here on the screen. Make sure that you guys are ready to present. Excellent. So at this time, I'm going to get ready for them to present their very first speech of the debate. Since Charlie is our pro speaker, he will be going first, and he'll give a 4-minute presentation of his arguments for why he agrees with the topic. So Charlie, whenever you're ready, there'll be 4 minutes on the clock.
Thank you. Social media companies are all about information. They make money from information, and sometimes they spread false information, whether intentional or not, through their websites. These are two reasons why I and many others believe that government regulation on social media companies does more good than harm. First, I'll be speaking about how government regulation can protect private information from social media companies. Secondly, government regulations can also protect from misinformation. Government regulation on social media companies can fix the breach of privacy that most social media companies partake in through a multitude of possible laws that governments can put in place. Another way to fix this issue would be to give social media companies less legal protection in a legal setting, where someone is accusing social media companies of stealing their information. An example of the first way that governments could fix this issue is in the European Union, where the General Data Protection Regulation, implemented in May of 2018, has succeeded in its intended purpose of handing over control of personal data more to its citizens than companies. By fixing this issue, governments are protecting their citizens from the horrors of the internet while letting them have access to all else. Also, they're also protecting their citizens from identity theft and targeted advertising. In addition, another example that government regulation can do more good than harm is that they can stop the spread of misinformation that might demonize a minority to the point of violence or cause other adverse, unwanted effects. These can both be fixed by making social media companies liable for what is on their platforms. Just like newspapers and news stations are, this would make it so that social media companies are liable for anything that is found on their platforms. For example, if someone posts violent content on a social media platform and it is able to get through the social media company's web, then the social media company is responsible, and they no longer are not responsible. By fixing this issue, governments are protecting themselves and their citizens from the dangers of misinformation and what misinformation can cause. In summary, by fixing breaches of privacy and the spread of misinformation, government regulation can easily do more good than harm, as well as taking away most of the danger that social media poses against society. That, Judge, is why you should vote that social media regulation does more good than harm. I now stand ready for cross-examination.
Thank you, Charlie. Now at this time, Tanae is going to stand up and give a 1 minute and 30-second cross-examination of Charlie, which means that he's going to ask Charlie questions about the speech that he just gave to clarify and to see if he can get Charlie to admit to some things that he might use later in his refutation speech. So 1 minute and 30 seconds on the clock whenever you're ready, Tanae.
Okay, so first, in your first argument, Charlie, your argument that government will protect the privacy of citizens, you said that there were a multitude of possible laws that they could use. Can you give me an example of one law that they could use to protect citizens?
Due to the fact that this is not in any individual country, when I said a multitude of possible laws, I did mean 100% possible, because not all nations have put regulations in place against social media companies, and only a few have actually worked if they have been made correctly. So by a multitude of possible laws, that means that there are ways that governments could regulate on social media companies, as governments have regulated on social media companies, but there is still a lot of creativity that can be allowed to each government. There isn't like a go-to way.
Okay, then again, your first argument, you said you could give companies less legal protection and give more legal protection to the user. Can you give me an example of a legal protection right now that companies have that you would remove?
So companies at current moment are not liable for anything any information that is found. That is one thing that the government would most likely want to take away, as well as in general, in a courtroom, more money means better lawyers. I would say that if a government could figure out some way to fix that, then they probably should.
And that's
And then
time.
in your okay.
That's time
Thank
for the end
you.
of cross-examination. Right, at this point, we'll transition over to Tanae, who will be giving the Khan opening speech, where he will stand up and give his own arguments for why he believes we should disagree with the topic. So Tanae, 4 minutes on the clock for your speech whenever you're ready.
Okay. Social media is becoming an increasingly big part of our lives. According to the Pew Research Center, about 7 in 10 Americans are on social media. The prevalence of social media in American society raises questions like, should the government regulate content? And how do we balance making social media a safer place and maintaining our online freedom? Though some may believe that government regulations would make social media sites safer, I believe that government regulation of social media does more harm than good. The reason I take this stance is because government regulations will restrict our freedom of speech online. Social media companies may move their platforms overseas to avoid regulations, and social media platforms are already fully capable of self-regulation. Government regulation can restrict freedom of expression online. According to the Dean of Berkeley School of Law, Erwin Chemerinsky, freedom of expression helps people make better decisions and individuals benefit from expressing their views. The general consensus among scholars is that expression is vital and must be protected. Chemerinsky furthers that freedom of expression is beneficial to mental health and applies to today's social media. One famous example of a regulated social media is China's, where the government forces citizens to use WeChat, controls what people can see online, and threatens jail time for provocative posts. If we allow the government to regulate social media, we could end up like China. Additionally, government regulations on social media platforms will force companies to move overseas. Complying with regulations is expensive. Companies will decide to move abroad to avoid these regulations. An example of this is when Facebook moved their assets to Ireland due to regulations and taxes in the United States. As a result of the Facebook case, the United States lost billions of dollars in taxes. If regulations are put in place, countries with more regulations will lose jobs to people in other countries. If the United States loses tax revenue, officials will be forced to consider defunding critical government programs such as education, welfare, and first responders. Government regulations cause unnecessary harm to Americans. Platforms already have the power and resources to self-regulate efficiently. If platforms do not regulate, they will lose credibility. And why would anyone want to advertise on an unpredictable platform full of fake news? An example of this is the Facebook ad boycott, where over 200 companies pulled their ads from the platform in response to hate speech on the site. Facebook immediately started changing their rules about posting. This demonstrates how social media companies are incentivized to regulate, to keep users and advertising companies on their platform and remain competitive with other platforms that self-regulate. Platforms like YouTube and TikTok already have regulations in place that are working. Although they need further improvement, scrapping the regulations that currently exist would be impractical. Government regulations would limit our freedom of expression and cost billions in tax revenue. For no reason, we can keep our freedom of expression along with tax revenue while social media companies self-regulate. I do hope that you agree with my argument and vote for Khan. I am now ready for cross-examination.
All right, Charlie, 1 minute and 30 seconds.
All right. First, you said that companies would move overseas to avoid regulations, although you also mentioned taxes. So, to prevent a company from moving overseas, wouldn't they move overseas anyway because of taxes?
No, see, the thing is, right now they can pay the taxes. It's fine. But when you add regulations on top of that, it's really a hassle, and it could just be easier for them to move overseas pay less taxes while not doing with the regulations. Right now, they're fine with the taxes. The taxes really don't matter as much to them, but they will move overseas if it becomes a hassle with regulations.
All right. You also said that it would restrict freedom of speech. How might it do that?
So let's say you post something online, right? Now you say, I think the person right now sitting in the White House did this wrong or did that wrong. Now the government says, okay, I don't like that because I want to be reelected. So they take it down. Now your freedom of speech, that statement does not infringe on your freedom of speech, but it's been taken down due to bias of the government. So that's just an example of one way freedom of speech can be infringed on the government, on the platforms.
Do you believe that there are regulations that could be taken that do not restrict freedom of speech and will not?
Well,
That's time for
right
cross-examination.
now, thank you.
All right. At this point in the debate, we're ready to move on into refutation speeches. This is the part of the debate where each of the debaters will have a chance to prepare their responses to the other person's arguments and then present them in another speech. So because Charlie was our pro speaker, he'll give the first refutation. Charlie, would you like to use any of your 2 minutes of prep time?
Yes, I would like to take 30 seconds if you do not mind.
All right. I'll let you know at 30 seconds. I'll stop the clock whenever you tell me you're ready. Now, for those of you watching who might not know what's going on right now, each debater controls 2 minutes of preparation time during the debate, and they can choose when they would like to use it. So Charlie's choosing to use some of his now to prepare for this speech. You ready, Charlie?
Yes, will you please pause the timer?
28 seconds used. You have 1 minute and 32 seconds remaining. So this is going to be a 1 minute and 30-second refutation speech against Tanay's arguments. Whenever you're ready, Charlie.
My opponent said that if we start regulating social media, we might become like China. Although China is a very different situation, as it is a totalitarian regime in which the populace does not get to choose their leaders, and leaders are not switched out very often. Most of the time, leaders rule for life. Sometimes, although most of the time, less. Secondly, freedom of speech isn't necessarily infringed on by government regulation, as if government regulation follows already put into place laws, then only posts that are violent or have the chance to cause violence are to be taken down, as well as the fact that in our current political setting, it would be extremely easy for a group of people, if they had their posts taken down, to get very upset and start bringing up sentiment among the population and also make the government change. Also, you kept bringing it back to America, but the rest of the world is in existence, and what we're speaking about isn't just the US and China. That, Judge, is why I ask you to vote pro on this subject, and I am now finished with my refutation speech.
Thank you, Charlie. Now, at this point, Tanay has the option to use some of his preparation time as well, if he would like to. So, Tanay, would you like to use some of your 2 minutes?
Yes, please. Can you alert me at 45 seconds?
I will do that. Clock starts now. You've used 45 seconds.
Okay. Ready to begin. So first I want to address the fact that I mentioned America to connect with the audience, and really my logic with China applies to many other countries because only 57% of countries are democratic, well, according to the Pew Research Center. So the rest you really don't know because leaders won't be elected and officials don't get elected by the people. It's a different process. Then I'm going to move on to Charlie's first argument, where he stated that there are multitude of reasons, multitude of possible laws that can give control of information to users. However, he fails to mention any combination of laws. He gives an example, but he fails to mention any combination of laws that work, and he called them creative, which leads the audience to believe that these will be hard to find. And right now, social media companies are regulating efficiently. Why do we need to introduce all these new laws when social media companies can self-regulate and maybe make a few tweaks in their regulations so that privacy is a focus. Then my opponent Charlie also mentioned disinformation. However, I think he fails to recognize the fact that governments can be very. I hope you vote for Khan because of the lack of evidence.
Thank you, Tanay. We've just concluded the second refutation speech from the Khan side, which means that now we're ready to move into the last phase of the debate, the closing speeches. So, just like before, Charlie will speak first, and he'll give the first closing argument. So, Charlie, would you like to use the remainder of your prep time?
Yes, if you do not mind, I would.
All right, you have 1 minute and 30 seconds remaining. Now, as the debaters are preparing for this final phase of the debate, the closing arguments, the closing speeches, are meant to be the final plea, the final call on the audience or the judge to agree with their side of the argument. Our closing speeches today will only be 1 minute long, which means that they have to condense the entire debate immensely down to a few compelling ideas to try to ask you, the audience or the judges, to agree with their side.
I'm now ready to speak. If you would please pause the clock, Judge.
All right, the clock is stopped. You have 1 minute on the timer for your closing speech, Charlie.
Thank you. I would like to bring back evidence of a law that works from my opening speech. The example was in the EU, where the General Data Protection Regulation Act, implemented in May of 2018, succeeded in its intended purpose of handing over control of personal data more to the citizens instead of social media companies. This law has been shown to work, and I do imagine that many other countries may decide to copy it or closely work off of it. Next, if we do not regulate social media now, there are two possibilities of a world that I could see coming up. We could either end up with enormous monopolies akin to the oil barons of the late 1800s, where no one is able to stop them and there's no competition. This would destroy the tech industry, as there would be a few extremely large companies with extremely large amounts of profits that might be able to buy out the government.
And
Next,
that is time.
and that, Judge, is why I encourage you to vote pro on this argument.
Thank you, Charlie.
Can I use the rest of my prep time?
You may. The clock starts now. I'll tell you when your time is up. All right, Tanae, that is the end of your prep time. So we're now ready for your 1-minute closing speech.
We need to prevent government regulations. Otherwise, we will be restricted online. And yeah, we will be restricted online, and companies will move overseas if governments regulate. I like the fact that Charlie brought up monopolies. Government regulations may also create monopolies because regulations make it expensive and discourage innovation and startups because of extra expenses. But now, let's imagine a world where speech is completely restricted online. You don't get to say what you feel like, and people aren't comfortable saying what they want on social media because they fear that it'll just be taken away by the government, and the government will come and arrest them even because the government knows exactly where they live. And now, let's see, without government regulations, the world will stay like it is. I don't see many problems right now without government regulations. The social media companies can still regulate and we'll be completely fine. I still don't see why we really have to change. We can make a few tweaks and yeah, vote for con.
That is time. All right. Thank you. And thank you, Charlie, for showing off that debate to us this afternoon. At this time, we're ready to move on to our next pair of debaters for this afternoon. This next pair of debaters will be Kyle Zhao, and Alice Xu. Kyle and Alice will be debating on the same topic as Charlie and Tanae did. Kyle will be our pro speaker in favor of the topic, arguing that government regulation of social media companies does more good than harm. And Alice will be our con speaker, arguing that we should disagree with that statement. So Kyle, Alice, whenever you're ready to debate, we are ready to begin. So Kyle, 4 minutes on the clock for your opening speech.
All right, thank you. In 2020, an estimated 3.8 billion people worldwide use social media, and these users average about 2 hours and 24 minutes of usage per day. To put that into perspective, the world population is about 7.8 billion people, which means that around half the world uses social media. But with that amount of users, restrictions on social media is inevitable. Government regulation of social media companies does more good than harm. And I have two main arguments to prove this. Government regulation prevents cyberbullying, and government regulation protects children from objectionable content. Now, to start off with how government regulation of social media companies can help prevent cyberbullying, Cyberbullying is the use of electronic communication to bully a person, typically by sending messages of an intimidating or threatening nature. According to the 2017 Youth Risk Behavior Surveillance System, an estimated 14.9% of all high school students were electronically bullied in the 12 months prior to the survey. And along with that, according to the Cyberbullying Research Center, 64% of people who have been cyberbullied say it affects their ability to learn and feel safe at school. On certain virtual platforms such as Instagram, Facebook, etc., people can be exposed to many unkind messages. And since the government has the power to censor those messages, there would be a lot less cyberbullying present on social media. Other examples are the government could require companies to issue warnings or bans to people reported or accused of cyberbullying. Restrictions on excessive language could also be required based on the circumstances. Now, if the government enforced these regulations, the amount of people cyberbullied and cyberbullies will drop greatly. The effects of cyberbullying will not be severe or even present anymore, and the government will pretty much save lives. Overall, cyberbullying primarily takes place on social media websites slash apps, and government regulation of social media can prevent and decrease cyberbullying as well as the harmful effects that come with it. Now, to continue on to my second argument on how government regulation can protect children from objectionable content, of the 3.8 billion people around the world, many of them are children. And according to the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, 90% of all teens have used social media. Social media softwares, again, are platforms with little to no restrictions where all forms of content can be shared. And in just a few taps, a 12-year-old could witness the dead remains of a person. Government regulation of social media can prevent the exposure of such content through marking content with a warning or banner and requiring an account with the required age. If the government required companies to enact these solutions, little to no children would encounter content meant for adults, thus less mental health issues and less fear. In conclusion, social media is by definition websites and applications that enable users to create and share content or to participate in social networking. That means they can talk to the others and perhaps cyberbully them. The same goes with how people can post / create whatever they want on social media. Thus, anyone, including children, can access mature content that can result extremely. Overall, government regulation of social media is crucial to prevent extreme harm that can be done through cyberbullying and the exposure of mature media to children. And for the reasons stated before, vote pro ballot. Stand ready for cross-examination.
Kyle. Now Alice will give her 1 minute and 30-second cross-examination over his speech.
So earlier you said that the government would censor disrespectful or damaging words in order to stop cyberbullying, but can we be sure that they will censor the correct information?
Could be. It really depends because the government is not doing it. The government is requiring the social media companies to do it who know how to code software.
Okay. You also said that social media companies would require warnings on cyberbullying posts, but I'm pretty sure they already do that. So is this still useful?
Yes, it could be useful for they could make it even more like strong as of a defense.
Does the government have the technology to do this all?
As I said before, the government is requiring social media companies to do this.
Okay. Could you also say again how the government would stop objectionable content from spreading? I didn't quite catch that.
Yes, I could. So, government, they could prevent the exposure of such content through like marking it with a warning or a banner and requiring an account with a required age. Just as two examples.
Okay.
And that is time for the end of cross-examination. Alice, we're ready for you to give your 4-minute opening speech and present your arguments. So, present. You may begin.
Did you know that YouTube employs 10,000 people in monitoring and removing content? Social media companies already do a great job of regulating their platforms. The government doesn't need to interfere, which is why government regulation on social media companies does more harm than good. I have 3 reasons. First, government regulation will lead to oppressive censorship. Second, government regulations are not needed. Finally, government regulation will lead to the spread of propaganda. The government should not regulate social media because they can abuse their power in order to censor information, in order to preserve their political power. Take China, for an example. According to the Council on Foreign Relations, certain websites that the government deems potentially dangerous, like Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, are fully blocked. Specific material considered a threat to political stability is also banned, including controversial photos and videos, as well as search terms. The government is particularly keen on blocking reports of issues that could incite social unrest, like official corruption, the economy, health and environmental scandals, certain religious groups, and ethnic strife. The Chinese government censors all information that is a threat to their political stability. By doing this, they're abusing their power and controlling the one opinion that citizens see. We don't need government regulation on social media because companies already do a great job of self-regulating. YouTube has been especially good at this. According to BBC in 2020, YouTube releases a transparency report, which gives data on its removal of inappropriate content. 8.8 million videos were taken down between July and September 2019, with 93% of them automatically removed by machines, and 2/3 of these clips not receiving a single view. It also removed 3.3 million channels and 517 million comments. Globally, YouTube employs 10,000 people in monitoring and removing content, as well as policy development. Facebook, which owns Instagram, has more than 35,000 people around the world working on safety and security. Between July and September 2019, it took action on 33 million pieces of content. Social media companies already do a great job of regulating their platform. They don't need any government regulation. At this point, the only thing the government would do is misuse their powers. The government should not regulate social media because they can use it to spread propaganda and manipulate public opinion with cyber troops. According to Business Insider, China pays 2 million people to fabricate pro-government social media posts and insert them in real time. The commentators, known as the 50-cent party because they are allegedly paid 50 Chinese cents per post, publish around 448 million posts per year. On social media, instead of engaging on controversial issues, China puts out massive amounts of happy, positive cheerleading posts. These posts seem to be aimed at distracting the public from controversial and central issues of the day. The Chinese government is paying people to write good things on social media and the government in order to draw attention away from the current problems. Citizens end up being greatly misinformed. We do not want to live in a world where the government controls social media and where they use it to spread propaganda. Countries also use cyber troops, according to Oxford. Cyber troops use a variety of strategies, tools, and techniques for social media manipulation. Generally speaking, teams have an overarching communication strategy that involves creating official government applications, websites, or platforms. Some teams use pro-government, positive nationalistic language when engaging with the public online. Other teams will harass, troll, or threaten users who express dissenting positions. The government should not be hiring people to watch over them if they don't want to be watched. The government is manipulating what people are believing and forcing them to have their opinion. The government should not be able to regulate social media for 3 reasons. They can censor information, spread propaganda on their platforms, and because social media companies already do a great job of self-regulating. Social media is such an integral part of our lives. Do we really want it to be controlled by the government who can use it against us? Judge, I now stand ready for cross-examination.
Thank you, Alice. Kyle, you have 1 minute and 30 seconds.
Okay. So, Alice, in your intro, you said that 10,000 people on YouTube are employed to remove content. Could you tell me where you're getting that evidence from?
From BBC in 2020.
Okay. Let's see. In your third argument, you were talking about this 50 Cent party.
Mm-hmm.
Correct. Okay, so where are you getting all this information from?
From Business Insider.
Businesses. I see. So in your second argument, you were saying at the end of how YouTube already self-regulates and that if the government were to regulate, they would just misuse their power. And so if in theory that YouTube is self-regulated and the government were to regulate YouTube, how would they misuse their power?
As I said before, like China, they are currently spreading a bunch of propaganda and manipulating public opinion.
Are you sure that this China example is an accurate representation of the YouTube situation?
The YouTube situation is something separate. It just shows how social media companies are doing a really good job of self-regulating. The China example is because
You can finish your sentence, Alice.
the government is spreading propaganda and censoring information.
Okay.
Thank you very much. That concludes cross-examination. Now we move on to the refutation portion of the debate. Kyle, would you like to use any of your prep time?
Yes. Yes, please.
All right, the clock starts now. Let me know when you would like the prep time to stop. While Kyle and Alice are working right now, for those of you who are watching, those cross-examinations that you just viewed were opportunities for Kyle and Alice to ask each other questions to try to clarify information they might have missed or misunderstood, to get admissions from each other that they can use to use their opponent's words against them in their refutation speeches, or just to try to get their opponents to say things that might discredit their position on the topic in front of the judge and the audience to make their own side look more persuasive and more like a viable option.
All right. Please stop the timer.
Time is stopped at 1 minute and 32 seconds. You have 28 seconds of prep time remaining.
Okay, so I guess I'll start. Throughout Alice's speech, she mentioned YouTube at least twice, once in her intro and once in her second argument. Now, the thing about it is that YouTube is only one social media software website of many, many more, such as TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, etc. So even though she mentioned a lot of statistics and evidence in YouTube, that does not necessarily apply to Instagram or Twitter, etc. Also, Alice, in her second argument, said that the government would misuse their power because YouTube has already self-regulated. But there's really no factual evidence that the government would do this. If YouTube was actually self-regulated, then the government would probably have no part in taking regulation in YouTube because there's no need to. And just because China may have misused their power for social media, this is a global topic, and we're talking about many countries such as the US, Canada, etc., not just China, which cannot really accurately represent all the social media softwares in the world. And I'd like to take this remaining time to present my own topics again. Oh, or not.
Actually, time is up.
Can I use
Thank you, Kyle.
30 seconds as my prep time?
Clock starts now. I'll notify you at 30 seconds. Thirty seconds used.
So my opponent, Kyle, said that in order to stop cyberbullying, social media companies would require warnings on posts, but this already happens and social media companies do this. So that's not really necessary and we don't need government regulation. He also said that in order to stop the spread of cyberbullying, the government would censor information, not censor information, censor language that could be offensive, but he said it himself that he was unsure if the government would censor these words correctly. My opponent Kyle also said in order to stop the spread of objectionable content, we would mark posts. And as I said earlier, this already happens and we just don't need government regulation for this. My opponent Kyle also said that I only gave one example, which was YouTube, but I'd like to add that Facebook and Instagram, they globally employ 35,000 people in order to regulate their social media companies. He also said that my example of China was not a very good example because it didn't encompass all the countries globally, but it is a very good example because it's a concrete example of what happens when government regulation controls social media. You should vote for the con side, no government regulation, because social media companies already do a great job of self-regulating. As I said, YouTube has 10,000 workers working on regulating their safety and content. And also with government regulation, propaganda is easily spread. As I said, with the China example, the 50-cent party, where they pay people to write good things about the government. And because if we have government regulation, they will censor information. Such as China, they censor things that are a threat to their political stability.
And that is time. All right, thank you, Alice. So Alice has just finished presentation speech, and now we're ready to prepare for closing speeches. So Kyle, would you like to use the rest of your prep time?
Yep.
You have 28 seconds remaining. Those of you watching may notice that Alice and Kyle have used very different strategies for their prep time. Kyle used the most of his prep time to prepare for his refutation. Time is up, Kyle.
Okay.
While Alice saved most of her time for later for her closing speech. Those were strategic choices that they made based on how they felt about their opponent's arguments and what they thought they might need to be ready to speak. So Kyle, you have 1 minute on the clock for your closing speech. 1 minute.
Okay. So I would like to start off bringing back the recurring theme, China. One of the main examples in Alice's speech. And I'd like to point out couple flaws in it, actually. In the China example, Alice has not actually proved why China accurately represents globally. And all she said is how China has experienced some effects of government regulation. But again, not all countries may fall in this same exact hole like China has, for their different governments and different strategies. But in the pro world, we can see that children and victims of cyberbullying will not be there or will not be corrupted. For children can be saved because objectionable content will be gotten rid of, same as cyberbullies on the internet. While in the con world, the opposite will happen. children will still experience mental health issues and eternal fear. Same with victims of cyberbullying who may end up committing suicide and much worse.
And that is
Overall,
time.
I urge you to vote a pro ballot, and thank you.
I'd
Right.
like to use the rest of my time.
All right, you have 1 minute and 30 seconds remaining. While Alice is using her remaining minute and 30 seconds, those of you watching may have also noticed that Kyle used a technique in that closing speech called world building or world comparison. He tried to compare the pro world and the con world. And this is a technique that we learned this week that can be used to paint a picture of what each side represents. Of course, each debater has a very different view of what their own side represents compared to the other. But the technique allows the audience to visualize and imagine a positive or negative experience depending on whether or not the resolution or the topic is true, whether they agree with it or whether they don't. So by comparing worlds, Kyle has given you the opportunity to imagine life. A regulation keeps people safe, or a life where regulation is not present or not strong enough, and people have to deal with the consequences negatively. And Alice, it looks like your prep time clock has run out. You now have 1 minute to present your final closing speech of the debate.
Okay. So my opponent, Kyle, said that my example of China was not an accurate representation of the whole world because every place has different forms of government, even though that may be true, but this is a very good example of what happens when government regulation takes over social media. I urge you to vote for the con side because if we have government regulation, they will abuse their power in order to censor information and spread propaganda with cyber troops. And social media companies are already doing a great job of self-regulating. In a pro world where there's government regulations, everything the government finds offensive will be censored. They will abuse your powers and manipulate public opinion, allowing the citizens only to see what the government wants. However, in the world of con, where there is no government regulation, there is no censorship or propaganda spread on social media platforms. And there will be no government regulation. It's a safe place where there's no bias censoring of everything, where there's like a variety of opinions. So I urge you to vote for the con side.
Thank you very much, Alice. And that concludes our second debate of the afternoon. Good job, Kyle. Good job, Alice. Excellent closing speeches. We're to our third debate of the afternoon now, which will be with Avani Prabhu and Ria Budrani. Avani will be taking the pro position on the topic, advocating in favor of the benefits of government regulation of social media companies, and Ria will be taking the con position, arguing that government regulation is more good than it is harmful. So Avani and Ria, if you would join me here on the screen at this time so that we can begin your debate. Welcome, ladies. Now, Ria is on a little bit of a road trip right now, so she's going to be presenting from the car at afternoon, but we're still thankful that she's able to join us for our showcase. All right, ladies, I'm ready to begin when you are. So Avani, you have the first speech. 4 minutes on the clock whenever you're ready to begin. Avani, I think your microphone might still be muted.
Should the government regulate social media and content? Well, that's something people have been questioning. While there may be some cons, there are many reasons why the government regulation of social media companies does more good than harm. One reason why is because it will prevent cyberbullying and reduce depression rates. Another reason is because it will make information more reliable and trustworthy. And lastly, because it will make social media more safe and appropriate. Reason one. One reason why the government should regulate social media content is because it will prevent cyberbullying and reduce depression rates in teens. As of now, studies show that teenagers and young adults in the US spend most of their time on Instagram and Facebook and other social media platforms were shown to have anywhere from a 13 to 66% higher rate of reported depression. Social media provokes depression in people for many reasons, such as cyberbullying, self-esteem from comparing themselves to models, and etc. Depression often results in suicide if not treated. More than 1 in 3 young people in the US have experienced cyberbullying. There's one story about a teen who died from cyberbullying. His name is Kenneth Y. Sean Jr., a gay high school freshman from Paulina, Iowa. He took his own life after being bullied by classmates at school and online, and with death threats by phone. The bullying began with an anti-gay Facebook group created by Kenneth's classmates. His mother, Jean, of course, started after he came out, and from the people he had trusted, people that were originally his friends, they turned on him. A lot of people, they were either joined in or too scared to say anything. As you can see, since social media wasn't regulated, the story ended very tragically. This is just one of the many horrible incidents. If social media isn't regulated, more and more people will suffer and worst case die. This is something we can prevent, and the government can help these innocent people. Another reason why the government should regulate social media is because it will make information more reliable and trustworthy. Since social media is not regulated, people can easily make a rumor and it can spread like a wildflower since it wasn't taken down. Statistics show that 10% of Americans knowingly shared a fake news story online, and 30% of children and teenagers have shared a fake news story online. Listen to this headline. Joe Biden calls Trump supporters dregs of society. Sounds pretty believable, huh? Yeah, well, this is one of the top 10 most viewed fake stories of 2019. As you can see, fake news can be very believable and tricky. Who knows? Maybe the biggest headlines on social media are actually fake. But we'll never know since there's no regulations. It is so easy with just a few clicks on someone's finger to make a story so exciting and fake. If the government doesn't regulate social media, everything we are reading and viewing could potentially be fake news. It's important to educate others and only spread the truth. Otherwise, people get involved in something really fake. One last reason why the government shouldn't regulate social media is because it will make social media more safe and appropriate. A lot of users on social media like to post and spread inappropriate content, such as racist and degrading videos, and spread negative energy. 12% of teens say they frequently witness inappropriate behavior on social media, and 29% of social media users said they have either been stalked or contacted by a stranger they don't know. As you can see, this is very dangerous and just a little of the very inappropriate stuff that happens on social media. It's very dangerous to let people onto these sites that have no regulations. This is a hazard because it can spread radical ideas such as racism. It could be a safety issue because of stalking, child predators, and etc. Imagine scrolling through TikTok and you come across this inappropriate video that has just been posted. Since there are no regulations, the video hasn't been taken down. This user is still active in spreading inappropriate content, and lastly, you now feel uncomfortable and not safe. If the government regulated social media, we would be able to feel safe and protected and have privacy when scrolling through social media. Conclusion. As you can see, government regulation of social media does more good than harm. One reason why is because it will prevent cyberbullying and reduce depression rates. Another reason is because it will make information more reliable and trustworthy. And lastly, because it will make social media more safe and appropriate. With government regulations, we're one step closer to a safe and happy world.
Thank you, Avani. We're now ready for Ria to do a cross-examination of Avani. So Ria, you have 1 minute and 30 seconds on the clock. Let me know whenever you're ready to begin. Well, it looks like we just lost Ria's connection there for a minute. We're going to give her a chance to rejoin us. She's trying webinar at the moment. While Ria is waiting to rejoin the webinar so that we can see her and she can do her cross-examination, I want to comment on just a few things that Avani did during that presentation that you might have noticed. So Avani structured her speech with an introduction, a conclusion, and 3 main arguments. But each of those main arguments had a very specific structure to it. She utilized the claim, warrant, impact structure that we've been working on with some of these students since Public Speaking and Debate 101 last week or earlier on this summer. The claim, warrant, impact structure is basically this. You make your claim or your statement of what you would like to defend and prove. Then you give a warrant or a good reason for why you think that's true. And with that warrant, you include evidence from research and facts from common knowledge, things that you can use to try to support the claim that you're trying to prove to be true. But finally, the students, the impact or the significance, the significant results. Now, the impact is very important in the argument because the impact is the that becomes really persuasive. Understanding what the truth or the falsehood of the claim that you're trying to defend does to the debate is the most significant part of the argument. Because if we don't know why your argument is important, or we don't know what effects your argument have on, then we don't know exactly how much we should consider it. We don't know if we should consider it to be very important, or if we should not really consider it as important at all. So all of these students, Avani and Ria included, have been working on that claim, warrant, impact structure this week in their arguments. Looks like Ria might be rejoining us now. So Ria, whenever you're able, if you'll check in with us, can we hear you?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Ria, we're ready for you to give your 1 minute and 30-second cross-examination of Avani.
Okay. So my first question is, you said social media is not regulated, but then who is putting up the warning signs when the government is not involved?
So I meant by when social media is not regulated, I meant social media is not regulated properly, because most of the regulations that social media do aren't very effective.
Okay. And how does the government regulate what's fake and what's not fake?
The government can regulate what's fake and not fake because most of fake news is about the government, so they can like verify that, and also they can find ways to maybe like ask the person and like verify with proof, if to like ask the person for proof to verify if it's fake or not.
How do you know fake news only has to do with the government usually?
Well, that's like an example of the most viewed like fake stories, because that's what my research showed. But also, if it's not about the government can always contact the person and ask for proof.
Do you have a source for that?
Yeah.
What's that source?
It's on my document.
Okay. And then what are they gonna do to stop what's fake? What do they do?
They can take down the post or get rid of the user.
But can't social media companies do the same thing?
They do, but sometimes they don't even check for fake news. A lot of stories on social media are fake and no one takes it down.
And that's time for the end of cross-examination.
Okay.
All right. At this point, we're ready for the con opening speech. So Ria is going to go ahead and present her arguments on the topic. 4 minutes on the clock whenever you're ready, Ria.
Okay. Hold on 1 second. Okay. It was President Ronald Reagan that said, "Man is not free until government is limited." Government regulation has been a big problem, but specifically government regulation in the social media pages. I have two reasons why the government regulation of social media companies does more harm than good. First, government regulation takes away freedom of speech. Second, it violates the freedom of press. Government regulation takes away freedom of speech. People believe that on social media, they have some sort of freedom to say what they believe. When people think that they cannot say what they believe, they feel like all users on this app deserve to have privacy in what they say and not feel like they need to be silent. Users trade creating an account for their personal data, which eventually goes to the government if they become involved. According to the Observer Research Foundation, they stated that some anonymous social media platforms have gone into bankruptcy primarily because people do not feel comfortable sharing on the sites as a result of the government overruling them. Because many small or big businesses are advertising on social media apps, they have a chance of going bankrupt too. Another article by a company named Single Grind stated that there has been many social media apps that have gone bankrupt because people have stopped sharing on the app primarily because of the problem of freedom of speech. My second argument is that government regulation violates the freedom of the press. The First Amendment gives the right for any social media to exclude anyone from their platforms. Because social media applications are private media, they have a choice whether to let the government control it. There is no reason that the social media companies should need to have the government regulate their private media page when they can solve the problem by themselves. Social media apps have started putting warning signs for disinformation, inappropriate content, racist posts, and so much more. Plus, when the government comes in, they are taking our personal data too. According to USA Today, the people should be making the decisions, not the government with so much power. They also stated that Facebook and Twitter have been successful at limiting fake news, and the other social media companies are in the beginning stages. Why should the government define what is true and what is not? The government also could be biased, causing people to swing their decisions by seeing things on the internet that may or may not be true. The government has no place in controlling our social media platforms. Not only are they not needed, they are also harming us by taking away our freedom of speech and our freedom of press, causing bankruptcy to many businesses. We need to make it clear that our beliefs cannot be regulated by the government. I would like to end my speech with a quote that the government is not the solution to our problem. The government is the problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Ria. We're now ready for Avani to do a 1 minute and 30-second cross-examination.
Okay, so my first question for you is, how is government breach of privacy and how is the privacy that you get from the government, the privacy that you get from social media different?
I'm not sure I understand your question. Can you reword it?
Okay, so I'm asking, you said that if the government gets regulations over social media, it loses our privacy. But if there's no government regulations on social media, then there's more privacy.
Well, it's because they're taking our data when they come in, they take our data, and that takes our private things, like it could take who we support, our personal name, our names, and all that stuff. That's the privacy I'm talking about.
Okay. Another question I wanted to ask is, how is government taking away our freedom of speech if they regulate inappropriate content on social media?
Well, because the government has so much power that it scares people. If they know, for example, or like when you put it in perspective, so Wait, can you repeat your question? I think I got it wrong. Wait, can you repeat it?
Okay, so how is government taking
How is government taking
how is government
our freedom
regulation
of speech?
taking away our freedom of speech?
Yeah, so people get scared, so they feel like they don't feel safe posting on it, and that takes away our freedom of speech of saying what we believe.
And that's time for the end of cross-examination. All right, ladies, we're ready to move into the refutation speeches. So Avani, you have 2 minutes of prep time at your disposal. Would you like to use any of it?
Can I use a minute?
All right, I'll notify you when the clock hits 1 minute. One minute used.
Okay. So the first thing she said was government regulations causes bankruptcy, and government regulations won't cause bankruptcy because the more safe that social media is, and the more safe and more appropriate social media is, the more comfortable parents will feel letting their kids onto social media. And our generation is filled with children, so more of our generation going onto social media will mean more business for social media because people will feel more comfortable and more safe on there when there's regulations. And another point she said was that social media already does regulate content, but that's not true because they are not very effective when regulating social media content because there's a lot of content on there that's either fake or was wrong and was taken down, but other people have reposted it. And social media companies weren't quick enough to take these posts down. So it easily spread and it was too late for anything to happen. Another thing she said was that social media keeps all their data on a cloud, but she said that the government will take all their data, but the truth is social media keeps all our data and personal like search histories and stuff on a cloud. And that's a problem because if the social media companies are taking all our information, we need to have some sort of government or some kind of place to like regulate that and make sure that our private stuff are staying private. One last thing is inappropriate content being on social media pages. It's important that we need to take that down because it makes people feel uncomfortable.
And that's time. All right. Thank you, Avani, for that refutation speech. So you may have noticed that while Avani was giving that refutation speech, she was trying to go point by point through some of the things that Ria had brought up in her speech. Now, when we talk to the students about what refutation and your opening arguments are supposed to look like, we use the illustration of showing a house. Maybe some of you have moved before, or you have had to sell a house. And when you're showing a house, you're trying to convince someone else to buy what they should think is a good deal. You're trying to present all the wonderful things about the house. You're trying to show that it has a great amount of square footage, it has an open floor plan, and these are all reasons why you should want to buy my house. But on refutation, it's almost like someone coming in and doing a home inspection before the house is sold, before the house gets purchased, and pointing out to the potential buyer, well, hold on a minute, there's some rot under the floorboards, or there's water damage in the walls, or the roof has some hail damage and might start leaking. And so a refutation speech is intended to try to get the audience to question the other person's ideas, almost like a home inspector might try to convince someone who's looking at buying a home that there are some issues with the home that they need to be aware about. So good job showing that refutation speech to us, Avani. Looks like Ria is joining us again. Ria, are you able to rejoin us on the screen? There she is. Ria, you were able to rejoin us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now, Ria.
Okay.
So Ria,
Mhm.
if you're ready, we're ready for you to give your refutation speech of Avani's opening arguments.
I actually didn't hear her refutation speech.
Did you hear any of it at all?
No.
All right. So given the circumstances, I'm going to give Avani a chance to briefly overview the main arguments that she gave against Ria's case so that Ria will have a better idea of what she needs to respond to. Briefly overview the points that you touched on for Ria.
Okay, thank you.
Avani, are you still there? Can you hear me?
No, I can. I didn't hear you before. So should I just recap my main points?
Yes, if you could recap the main points that you made during your refutation speech briefly, not the whole speech again, but just briefly the main attacks that you made so that she knows which points she needs to try to defend.
Okay. So the first point that I covered was that you said that government regulations will cause bankruptcy, but that's actually not true. In fact, it might cause more business for social media companies because the more safe social media companies are, this the more happier parents will feel sending their kids onto the platforms, and that means more business for social media companies. Another thing is you said a privacy breach because all the data is stored on the cloud if the government was in charge. But the truth is all your search history, your data, your text messages are all stored on a cloud on social media. In fact, last year Facebook had a problem with that. And one of my last points was that you said that inappropriate wait, one last thing is you said that it would be a problem with freedom of speech, but the government isn't getting rid of people's freedom of speech. They're just trying to eliminate anything inappropriate. So you're allowed to speak your mind as long as you're being respectful and not inappropriate. And most of social media
I can
regulations are
barely
not
hear you.
effective because a lot of the times after a post is taken down, it would have been a long time or someone else did it.
All right. So I know the audio was a little bit jumpy there, but Ria, hopefully that gives you at least a few things that you can take into consideration as you move into your speeches. So Ria, would you like to use any of your 2 minutes of prep time to prepare for your refutation speech of Avani's arguments?
Yes, can I use 45 seconds?
All right, I'll notify you at 45 seconds.
Okay, thank you. And this speech is 1 minute 30 seconds, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, I think I'm ready.
And that's 45 seconds used, right on time.
Okay.
So 1 minute and 30 seconds on the clock for you, Ria.
So my opponent's first claim, she said freedom of speech and the government's not taking it away, and I disagree with that. So first, freedom of speech is not, it's bad or good, whatever you're saying, but the freedom of speech, like she said too, it doesn't involve the bad that you say. So, but the government is very powerful, like I said, and it can scare people how powerful it is. So when they come in and people express themselves, that's where they express themselves, because they're not in person with anybody, so it's different when you're online. So when the government comes in and they're so powerful, they're taking away their free speech because people are scared to share what they believe, because they don't want to get in trouble, even if they're saying something good, because they don't know. So my second point, she said government regulation doesn't cause bankruptcy, but I disagree with that, because when people get scared, like I said in my first point, when people get scared, they don't post, which causes less people to more people to delete their profiles and get rid of that app. So that app will probably end up going bankruptcy, which leads to many small businesses or even big advertise on these apps, which causes them to go into bankruptcy too. She also went over posts being taken down, and she said they're not doing a good job, but I disagree, because Facebook and Twitter has been very successful in taking down posts like those. And the other social media apps are in the beginning stages of doing it, but they're becoming very successful at it too. Thank you.
All right, and that concludes the refutation portion of our debate. We're ready to move into closing arguments. Avani, would you like to use the remainder of your time?
Yeah, can I have my last minute?
1 minute is left on the clock for you. Clock starts now. And Avani, it looks like your time is up. 1 minute is on the clock for your final closing speech.
As you can see, I strongly believe that government regulations would do more good than harm. With government regulations, it can stop cyberbullying, it can lower depression rates, it can make information more reliable and trustworthy, and lastly, it can stop and lastly, it can sorry, I forgot my last point, but there's no need but government regulations will make everybody feel safer, and there's no need to be scared if you've done nothing wrong, because if you're spreading good ideas and you're using your platform for good to help others and express yourself, there's nothing the government can do to take this away from you. And if the government is unfair, you can sue them and go to court. Also, freedom of speech is fine as long as you're not using it to hurt others' feelings and using it to drag other people down. And lastly, with government regulations,
That's time.
sorry, my
That's all right. Thank you, Avani. Ria, would you like to use the remaining 1 minute and 15 seconds of your prep time?
Yes, please.
All right, I'll start your clock. I think if there's one takeaway that we can all have debate and from watching these students work this week, even just the virtual aspect generally, it's been that they've put in a lot of hard work and they've had to overcome quite a bit, from coronavirus to internet glitchy issues to any other struggles that they've had on a personal and individual level with their own speaking and debate skills. So I hope that parents, as you're watching, one of the takeaways you have from this time is that these students really have come a very long way and made a lot of progress, especially given the adversity and the circumstances that they've been facing. And Adrienne and I are very proud of them for their commitment and their flexibility during this very crazy time. All right, that's 1 minute and 15 seconds, Ria. Are you ready for your closing speech?
Yes, I am. I would like to start off my speech saying that government regulation does more harm than good. Government regulation can lead to bankruptcy because people feel like they cannot share what they believe. Government regulation does take away freedom of speech and freedom of press. I would like to share an analogy. If you are in school with a table full of kids and you're talking and the teacher comes over, you probably will stop talking. The teacher is like the authority or the government, and you don't feel as comfortable speaking. It's the same thing as what's happening with government regulation. People feel scared when they know that the government is ruling over their head. Judge, I urge you to vote con. Thank you.
And thank you, Ria and Avani, for that debate. I'm going to give them a big virtual round of applause for making it all the way through that. Thank you, ladies. That was fantastic. And at this time, we are ready to move on to our next debate. Our next two debaters for this afternoon are Jack Jiang and Eddie Wu. Jack will be the pro debater in this speech, or in this debate rather, and Eddie will be the con debater.
Actually, I think it's the other way around.
It is the other way around. You're right, gentlemen. I mistakenly put your names in reverse order. That's a good catch. Our pro debater will be Eddie Wu, and our con debater will be Jack Jiang. So Eddie and Jack, whenever you gentlemen are ready, I have 4 minutes on the clock for Eddie's opening speech.
Okay, Jack, you ready?
Yes.
Okay, let's begin. So former President Barack Obama once said, there are certain common goods, our air, our water, that require to have some regulation. Government regulation is necessary to make sure that everyone is safe. And in this modern world where social media has become one of the most common things, I affirm, resolve, government regulation on social media companies does more good than harm for three key reasons. The first is that government regulations on social media prevents disinformation. It also prevents cyberbullying, and lastly, it will protect personal privacy. Government contention one.
Eddie, it would appear that you have frozen on our screens. It may be that your internet connection has gotten laggy or glitchy. But don't worry, Jack will make sure that we can get you Eddie's opening speech here shortly. Well, folks, it looks like Eddie has gone offline for the moment. He must have lost his internet connection there where he is right now. So we're going to see if we can come up with a technical fix for that and give him a chance to rejoin us. Eddie, you've rejoined us. Can you check your microphone for us, Eddie? Nope, can't hear you yet. Check your audio settings, Eddie.
Can you hear me now?
Now we can hear you.
Okay.
All right.
Oh, I
So,
can just begin on my contention.
yes, Jack, are you okay if we begin with his first argument?
Yes.
All right.
Okay, so
Eddie, I'll
still
fix the clock for you.
like 3 minutes 30 seconds or 3 minutes around that time.
I'll give you 3:30. Go ahead.
Okay. Contention 1. Government regulation of social media companies will prevent disinformation. The Pew Research Center reports that in 2020, 62% of adults in the United States get their news from social media. Disinformation poses a real threat. Take, for example, disinformation that drinking bleach will protect you from the coronavirus. Ingesting bleach could lead to serious damage because it burns tissues in your throat, stomach, and mouth. It could also kill you. Regulations that prevent disinformation include requiring that shared content must be revised by third-party experts. Governments could also regulate that social media companies have to tag fake news clearly as fake news. Or they could issue a notification on any fake news read by the consumer prior or after to reading. Similar to what some platforms have, they could warn users of fake news before allowing them to actually read it. To ensure the safety of all social media users, disinformation must be stopped. Because the government can prevent disinformation, it will shield the public from the harms of fake news, such as deaths based on actions on fake info, harming one's credibility if they use fake news, and making decisions that don't really represent us. You deserve the truth. Contention 2. Government regulation will stop cyberbullying. Digital Label, one of the world's leading anti-bullying organizations, found that 42% of cyberbullied kids were on Instagram, 37% were on Facebook, and 31% on Snapchat in 2020. Government regulations such as requiring more workers to monitor social media to intervene in cyberbullying cases, as well as requiring all social media platforms to introduce a safe and secure way to report cyberbullying on these platforms. The government could also require that companies to enforce harsher punishments, such as permanent bans for cyberbullying or letting the government intervene. Cyberbullying affects everyone on social media. Think of this. Right now, if you and 6 other friends all have social media, chances are that at least one of you have considered suicide, and a 1/2 chance that they have actually attempted suicide. Coming from the bullyingstatistics.org in 2020. The CDC also reports that bullying behavior and suicide-related behavior are closely tied together. Many people being bullied are online through social media, and it is a very serious problem that should be dealt with by the government. Contention 3. Government regulation on social media companies will protect individual privacy. In fact, in 1988, the United Nations reached a conclusion that the storage of digital personal data must be regulated by law to prevent information reaching people who would abuse these rights. The government could introduce requirements such as ensuring fully informed what personal information has been gathered, and individuals the power to withdraw that information. Furthermore, the government could introduce new laws related to liability and criminal punishments for hacking and taking personal information. Without privacy protection, things like the Equifax could happen, where 143 million Americans' social security numbers were compromised. In fact, Jameson Lopp, a Bitcoin engineer, said that online privacy is directly related to one's own physical security in today's digital world. I've shown you that to effectively prevent disinformation and to effectively stop cyberbullying, as well as protect privacy on social media, the government must regulate these social media companies. For these reasons, we can clearly conclude that safety should be upheld by affirming the resolution. I now stand open for cross-examination.
All right. 1 minute and 30 seconds on the clock for cross.
Do you agree that governments can make a mistake where they wrongly prosecute someone who is falsely accused of cyberbullying, and then a harsh punishment could be enforced against them?
I believe that will happen because governments will actually use their consciousness, and also they will collectively talk it out before actually making a decision whether to punish or not this cyberbullying. So I don't think it will happen.
Okay. Can you give me one example of a government which has regulates social media and has no cyberbullying, no bias, and no wrongly prosecution?
Right. So it's impossible to get rid of cyberbullying, like absolutely every cyberbully. So I have a couple examples. So in fact, a poll done by Apopsis in 2018 in 28 countries, they asked parents whether or not their children were victims of cyberbullying, and they found that in Russia, only 1% of parents said that their children were cyberbullied, and in Japan, only 5%. In Russia, they require social media companies to store any data about Russians on servers within the country. And in Japan, they have a designated organization from the government to monitor social media, as well as regulations such as enforcing bans on accounts that do cyberbullying or calling on the government to deal with it.
Can you give me a source where someone actually followed the fake news or listened to it?
So in fact, I believe President Trump, he had a public announcement that drinking bleach would protect you from the coronavirus, which is obviously fake news. And then this 11 or 12-year-old boy actually believed him, so he drank a lot of bleach and eventually killed him from it.
And that's time. All right, Jack, whenever you're ready, I have 4 minutes on the clock waiting for your opening speech.
Imagine you're scrolling through social media when you see news that your favorite presidential candidate who plans to bring new change to the government made a racist comment, making you and others lose interest in electing him. Only a few days later do you find that that was fake news. However, there's a lasting impact on you and others' opinions of him. Why was this fake news allowed to spread around? Government regulation of social media results in more drawbacks than benefits. The reason why government regulation of social media would cause more consequences than advantages is there will be biased regulation and social media companies can self-regulate. My first claim on why government regulation of social media would provide more negative consequences than advantages is the government would make government-biased decisions. The government would put their views ahead of the social media community's views. There are many different parties/sides in politics, and the one the current government would want to support could use their power of regulating social media to increase support for that side. Governments want to manage their political reputation and won't fairly regulate like companies will. Some governments are corrupt and want to increase their control. If they have power to regulate social media, governments could remove posts that oppose them, posts that share the truth behind what is going on in the government, and ban users who are speaking out about problems in the government. When governments are handed this power, they can end up censoring valuable information. Evidence from SMP.com states that a Chinese user trying to send a picture about the report of 709 crackdown is blocked, showing an example of the government censoring information sent through social media. Also, people don't grow opposed to them. The government could be mistreating you, and if you want to spread your story of this mistreatment on social media, the government could see your post and then ban your account, resulting in no spread of your story online. This type of power should not be allowed in the government's hands, or it will be misused. where government regulations could grow and grow till they tip power in the government's favor. My second claim is that social media companies are more suited to regulating themselves than government regulation. In social media, there are concerns of fake news and cyberbullying spreading around. Companies are already putting in motion more restrictive policies on these topics that will catch these on social media and put a stop to it, so government regulation is not needed. From Wired.com, the leadership of Facebook's new review board states the review board would address areas including hate speech, harassment, and safety. It would make these final decisions on whether to allow specific content on Facebook and Instagram. As you can see, companies are prepared to regulate problems efficiently. Social media companies are already making efforts to combat the problem of fake news and are best suited to do so, because if the government were to regulate, there could be bias in their regulation. Evidence comes from about.fb.com, which states that Facebook has launched a COVID-19 Information Center that has helped more than 1 billion people with real news about COVID-19. This shows that Facebook is combating fake news with the spreading of real news. Another reason why self-regulation is a better suit than government regulation is the government might make poor decisions, especially if they are corrupt. For example, evidence from NPR.org shows Trump has signed a contract limiting the broad social protections enjoyed by social media companies because Twitter fact-checked 2 of his tweets. Trump and his administration plays a part in our government, and with regulation over social media, they could further the spread of fake news by loosely regulating fake news. Companies want to keep their customers, and if people feel unsatisfied with the regulations on social media, companies will be quick to change that. This is why companies are suited to self-regulate. To conclude, why government regulation over social media provides drastic drawbacks that do not outweigh the benefits is because government bias would occur, and companies are capable at self-regulation. If there was a corrupt government that regulated social media, they control the flow of news, political topics, and who is posting what. I'm ready for cross-examination.
All right, Eddie, 1 minute and 30 seconds on the clock.
Okay. Okay. Does government regulation mean like a law that controls the way a business can operate, specifically social media companies that we're talking about? What?
The government regulation does mean it could regulate certain post topics and whatever it decides to regulate, controlling a part of what happens on social media.
It's like a law that controls the way a business can operate, right?
I do not agree with that.
What? Well, what specifically was the regulation on the Chinese evidence of the censoring of the 701?
It was a biased decision that the government made because they believed that further spreading the news of one of their drastic measures that they did in the past would ruin their reputation, which is a biased thing to do while regulating.
What was the regulation that actually said, like a law put in place that actually said, oh, you can't like send to foreign people?
I do not have the specific law, but China has many laws that make it so, or many authorities that make it so you cannot post certain things, you cannot use certain websites or apps.
Okay. Now, can you give me like 3 examples of bias in government regulation of social media companies?
North Korea censoring news, North Korea censoring what can be seen, Latin American countries. What?
Exactly what was the regulation? That's what I'm asking for.
The regulation was what could be messaged, what news could be seen from other countries, what.
Could you give me specifically what they said?
I'm afraid not, because that is the end of cross-examination. Okay, and the end of our opening speeches. Now we're ready to move on to refutation.
I would like to use
prep time.
Prep time, yeah. Prep time starts now.
Now, for those watching, you may have noticed that Jack and Eddie had a fair bit of disagreement during that cross-examination, and that often happens during debate. One of the helpful things about cross-examination is that you get to discover just where you and your opponent agree and disagree on certain things, whether it's the definition of something, how a certain example should be applied, or
Okay,
even just agreeing on what government classifies as.
stop prep time.
30 seconds used. 1
Yeah,
minute and 30 seconds remaining, Eddie.
Okay. Okay, the rebuttal starts now. So I'm going to be going over my opponent's contentions and why they are wrong, why the affirmative is better. So starting at the top of my opponent's case, where he basically says that there will be government bias in making decisions. Well, I can give you 3 reasons why this is wrong. First, the government is a collection of people making decisions for the good of their country. This will ensure that all decisions are made with a good motive behind it, and there is minimal bias in making regulations. Second, he doesn't tell you any harms of government bias outweighing the good. He only says that it is a potential threat, which I prove to be false. Remember, Judge, my opponent must prove to you that government regulating social media companies does more harm than good, not that there is potential bias in actually making these decisions. Lastly, everyone has a certain bias. That means that if social media companies are making these regulations, they could easily make decisions without retaliation. Think about it for a minute. The goals of these social media companies is to generate profit. The government, on the other hand, their job is to protect the public. So who do you think we should put in the job of regulating social media? Right, the government, which does more good than harm. Second of all, in my opponent's second contention, well, there's a major problem with this. The negative must prove to the judges that government regulation actually does more harm than good. In his contention, all he said was that social media companies are already doing a good job, which I completely disagree with. But this contention does not relate to whether government regulation of social media actually does more harm than good. He's only saying that social media companies could also do it. Therefore, Judge, you must disregard his entire contention. That's why you should vote for the affirmative.
Thank you, Eddie. Jack, would you like to use any of your prep time?
1 minute of it.
All right, I'll notify you when the clock hits 1 minute. While Jack is preparing, I did a good job of following a structure that we talked about for refutation speeches. When you want to address someone's argument in refutation speeches, there are 3 main things that you need to do. First of all, you need to remind the audience of what you're referring to. So you need to remind the audience of what your opponent said and where they said it in their speech. Secondly, you have to point out the problem with their argument, whether it's a problem with their evidence and support, their reasoning, the claim that they're making, or if it's a problem with the significance or the results that they're trying to draw from it. And that's 1 minute, Jack. You have 1 minute remaining.
First, I would like to point out for Eddie's first claim that he said that governments could stop disinformation, but he did not provide any, he only assumed that government would do things better, and that social media cannot do it by themselves. However, I gave evidence in my opening speech how Facebook is already doing something to combat disinformation, which shows that social media companies can self-regulate, and already existing social media regulations, if they come into combat with government regulations, which could be biased because of political sides in the government and politicians wanting power and fame, that means more regulations would tangle and create problems in deciding what should go, what posts should be banned, what users should be banned, an overall problem. Another thing I want to point out in a second claim, he said cyberbullying, government could stop cyberbullying. However, cyberbullying can also occur in private messages where you threaten someone with murdering them in private messages, and if the government were to try to investigate that, that would be an invasion of your privacy, which is also not good. He also said there would be harsher punishments. However, there are many ways a government can have a problem trying to figure out if it's actually cyberbullying or not, because social media companies are more fit to decide whether something is cyberbullying because they have more experienced people on the review board, while in the government it's more older people who deal in politics, not technological and social media environment. Also, his third claim that government would leak privacy.
That's time for the end of the refutation speech.
Could I use the remaining of my 1 minute 30 prep time?
You may. 1 minute
Okay.
and 30 seconds on the clock.
Time starts now.
This debate is a good illustration of one of the things that's very difficult to learn in debate, extremely difficult, and that is trying to figure out which arguments are the most important. Because as you've seen, there are a lot of different arguments and attacks that get thrown back and forth in the debate. But Eddie and Jack have a very limited amount of time to respond to each other's arguments and to try to hash out their ideas. So, especially in the refutation speech, and even more so in the closing speech, they have to be very selective in which arguments they address and which ones they don't, because they just don't have time to address all of them. So there's a constant struggle to mention all of the things you possibly can in the time that you're allotted. And that's one of the inherent challenges of debate that's so fun to try to overcome, and to try to pit yourself against your opponent and figuring out who can be the most strategic as you go through the speeches. And that's 1 minute and 30 seconds, Eddie.
Okay.
So you have 1 minute on the clock for your closing speech.
Yeah, right. So, okay. So gonna go over my opponent's rebuttals, why they're wrong, and why I should vote affirmative. So in response to my first point, my opponent says that Facebook is already doing a good job combating disinformation and gives some examples of them. But Judge, you must remember that in this debate, the negative must prove that government regulations does more harm than good, not that social media companies can also regulate. That's not the point of the debate today. So Judge, his rebuttal is invalid. On his second point, he says that cyberbullying would infringe on private messages because they often happen, but social media companies can already see your private messages. There will not be a problem with that. And finally, he fails to address my third contention. A vote for the affirmative is a vote for a change in the status quo. In the negative world, things are not changed for the better. That 11-year-old boy still dies from drinking bleach because he believed it would prevent COVID. That 16-year-old girl still commits suicide because someone bullies her online, and that 63-year-old still gets their house and cars destroyed. Affirming is changing things for the better by introducing new regulations that will prevent all those things from happening. The boy doesn't die, the girl doesn't kill herself, and the grandfather doesn't get his house or cars damaged. Thank you. That is why you should affirm.
Jack, would you like to use your remaining minute of prep time?
Yes. Yes.
1 minute on the clock for you. And that's 1 minute. Jack, you now have 60 seconds to give us your final closing speech. I have the time on the clock whenever you're ready to begin.
Eddie said that I have no evidence to prove that there are more drawbacks than advantages. However, I've provided plenty of evidence on corrupt governments who are censoring information, like Trump, China, North Korea, and many more governments. As I said before, there's politics involved. Governments will censor whatever they want, censoring media reporters who speak up against them, people whose house was raided or arrested for a wrong reason. The governments can have this type of power and will use it for their own gain. Companies, however, want their customers to stay because of advertisements, and they need an audience, so they would create a comfortable environment where people are comfortable. If you imagine in the pro world where there is government regulation, heavy government regulation, news will be spread only by what the government thinks is acceptable. It will allow fake news to spread that can change your mind, changing the government into a sort of government like China, where everyday news is censored and you cannot speak out freely. As in the con world, you're living your everyday life normally, able to speak to your friends without your privacy taken away from you, where regulations will eventually lead to taking over your privacy, taking over what news you can see, taking over your daily life in social media. This is why you must vote for con.
All right, gentlemen, that concludes the debate. Thank you for sharing that presentation with us this afternoon. Both of those gentlemen doing a good job with world comparison in that final speech. We're now ready to move on to our final debate of the afternoon. This will be Tanay Nandan versus Ria Budrani. Now, you may notice that both of these speakers have debated before today, but Tanay actually had to fill in earlier because of a student who was unable to be with us this afternoon. And we have to have an even number of debaters so that everyone gets a chance to debate. So Tanay's speech that he gave last time was not actually the speech that he had prepared this week. That was a speech that he wrote last week in Public Speaking and Debate 101. And he was able to pull that out of the mothballs to fill in for our absent student this afternoon. So he will be giving his pro speech now against Ria Budrani, who will be sharing her con opening speech. So Tanay and Ria, if you two could join me here on screen. I want to thank you both before we get started for being willing to do this second debate so that we can get everyone to showcase their work for the week. If you're both ready to begin, I have 4 minutes on the clock for Tanay's first opening speech.
Yeah. You ready?
Yes, I am.
Problems have arisen in the way social media works today. Terrorism, cyberbullying, racism, disinformation, and many others prevail on social media. We need a solution to these problems, and the government is the best one. Government regulation of social media will do more good than harm. This is because it will prevent cyberbullying and protect young minds from inappropriate content. First, government regulation of social media will protect countless minors from cyberbullying. Cyberbullying is a mainstream problem on platforms. 12% of Twitter users and 11.4% of Facebook users are cyberbullied. In a study of 213 users by Robin M. Kowalski, professor of psychology at Clemson, this demonstrates that social media platforms are not regulating cyberbullying on platforms efficiently. An effective way to regulate is where social media sites flag content that can be interpreted as cyberbullying, and the government launches investigations and punishes or arrests bullies. This solves the common problem of bullies making multiple accounts and will keep your personal messages safe from the government unless you are cyberbullied or cyberbullying. If we regulate, many can be prevented from attempting suicide or self-harm. Cyberbullying victims are 2.57 times more likely to attempt suicide than the average person, according to a study done by the Journal of Medical Internet Research, or JMIR. According to JMIR, victims of cyberbullying also report low self-esteem and depression, a rising problem in American society. When we let the government regulate, levels of depression, low self-esteem, and suicide in the world will drop. Regulation by the government will save lives. Second, the government can protect children from objectionable content. A lot of content is not fit for a young kid browsing social media in their free time. Let's take the example of Logan Paul. He made a vlog in Aokigahara Forest in Japan, which contains the bodies of suicide victims, and he posted it on YouTube. Logan Paul's viewer base consists of many kids who definitely should not see content like that. Even with backlash, YouTube did not pull the video down, forcing Paul to do it himself. This demonstrates why we cannot leave social media platforms to their own devices. They take too long, and harm happens in between the time that the video is posted and they take it down. One suitable government regulation would be requiring ID for users to enable viewership of mature content. Paired with a computer algorithm checking content and government officials checking reports, we can drastically reduce the viewership of inappropriate content by minors. If regulations were put in place, the Logan Paul video would not have been seen by kids all over the world. If regulations are not put in place, minors may experience trauma due to viewing posts meant for older audiences. If regulations are not put in place, children may try replicating videos they see online, leading them to mental or physical harm. We need to get the government involved in social media because of cyberbullying and mature content. There are many problems in today's social media that can be fixed if and when the government steps in. I ask that you report any cyberbullying or inappropriate content that you may have come across on social media and that you vote for pro. I now stand ready for cross-examination.
Thank you,
Okay.
Tanae. 1 minute, 30 seconds on the clock.
So my first question is, how do you know social media users will flag posts?
Well, in my argument, I did not say that social media users will flag posts. Actually, I did, but I also mentioned that we will use an algorithm so that 90 to 95% of posts are already found. And then on top of that, government, then the last 5% we will depend on users. And if they don't, I mean, it's only the last 5%. At least we're at 95% efficiency, where right now social media companies aren't regulating efficiently enough.
How do you know this algorithm, your 95%, is going to be accurate?
Let's take the example of YouTube. Even though they're doing their regulation, they're not really pulling down content, they're just marking it. Well, if we use an algorithm like that, we can pull down a bunch of videos, a bunch of posts that really aren't working, aren't good enough.
So my next question is, do you think it'd be better for the government to give social media companies advice rather than the government regulating everything and scaring everyone?
Well, due to Article 230, the social media companies are not liable for this, so there's no guarantee they will actually act. So instead of giving them advice, the government can act, they can pull stuff down fast, and they can prevent harm.
Okay, my last question is, do you think the government with so much power will scare people away from the sites?
No, I do not, because the government will only be using their power for good, not harm. Well, there are multiple governments, and they will be using their power for good, and we can set up some guidelines so that they don't take advantage of the power.
And that's done. All right, now we're ready for Rhea to give her 4-minute speech for the con side. Whenever you're ready, Rhea.
Are you ready tonight?
Yes.
Okay. It was President Ronald Reagan that said man is not free until government is limited. Government regulation has been a big problem, but specifically government regulation in the social media pages. I have two reasons why the government regulation of social media companies does more harm than good. First, government regulation takes away the freedom of speech. Second, it violates the freedom of press. Government regulation takes away the freedom of speech. People believe that on social media, they have some sort of freedom to say what they believe. When people think that the government is ruling over them, they'll feel like they cannot share what they believe. All users on this app deserve to have privacy in what they say and not feel like they need to be silent. Users trade creating an account with their data to the social media app, which eventually goes to the government. According to the Observer Research Foundation, they stated that some social media platforms have gone into bankruptcy primarily because people do not feel comfortable sharing on the sites as a result of the government overruling them. Some of the sites are Meerkat and Daily Breath and FriendFeed. Because many small or big businesses are advertising on social media apps, they have a chance of going bankrupt too. And those are like clothing stores. Another article by a company named Single Grind stated that there have been many social media apps that have gone bankrupt because people have stopped sharing on the app, primarily because of the problem of freedom of speech. My second argument is that government regulation violates the freedom of the press. The First Amendment gives the right for any social media to exclude anyone from their platforms. Because social media applications are private media, they have a choice whether to let the government control it. There is no reason that social media companies should need to have the government regulate their private media pages when they can solve the problem themselves. Social media apps have started putting warning signs for discrimination, inappropriate content, racist posts, and so much more. Plus, when the government comes in, they are taking our personal data too. According to USA Today, the people should be making the decisions, not the government with so much power. They also stated that Facebook and Twitter have been very successful at limiting fake news, and other social media companies are in the beginning stages. Why should the government define what is true and what's not? The government also could be biased, causing people to swing their decisions by seeing things on the internet that may or may not be true. The government has no place in controlling our social media platforms. Not only are they not needed, they are also harming us by taking away our freedom of speech and our freedom of press, causing bankruptcy to many businesses. We need to make it clear that our beliefs cannot be regulated by the government. I would like to end my speech with a quote. Government is not the solution to our problem. The government is the problem. Thank you. I'm now ready for cross-examination.
Yep.
1 minute, 30 seconds on the clock.
Okay. So first, in your first argument, you stated that platforms may go bankrupt due to restrictions of freedom of speech.
Yes.
Does your source mention the size of companies that go bankrupt?
No, it does not. But they are pretty major sources.
Sources. Okay. And then in your first argument, you also said that people will stop using social media, or less viewers will go on social media because they are not comfortable on platforms with the government regulating. Can you give me evidence of declining viewership due to government regulation on social media in the past?
Of what? I missed the last part. What was of what?
Can you give me evidence of declining viewership due to government regulation on social media in the past?
So, like my source that I used?
Yeah, evidence of viewers
So, like,
stopping in the past.
going on the sources and leaving the
Yeah.
sources. Yeah, that's from the research foundation I used, the Observer Research Foundation, ORF.
Is there a statistic, or did they just state?
Well, that's why companies have gone bankrupt. That's the source I used. Because they noted that that's the reason they went bankrupt, because so many people left.
And then in your second argument, you also mentioned privacy. Do you agree with me that since the government already knows your name and location due to the US Census, they do not have much info to gain from IP addresses which don't even state your name?
No.
Rhea, you can give a brief response if you like.
Sorry, what?
You can give a brief response if you like.
Okay. They do not. I do not agree with that because they can also take your search history too. There's been cases of that too.
All right, and that is the end of opening speeches and cross-examination. We are now ready to move into our refutation portion of this final debate. Tanae, would you like to use any of your 2 minutes of prep time?
No, I'm good.
All right, Tanae has decided to leave all 2 of his minutes to his final speech.
Yes.
1 minute
Okay,
and 30
now
seconds on the clock.
Now I will go over my opponent's arguments of freedom of speech and why social media companies are not regulating efficiently enough, contrary to what my opponent says. In her first argument, my opponent stated that regulation will take away freedom of speech. We first have to define what freedom of speech protects. It does not protect when one says false information. If the government pulls down fake news, they are not infringing on freedom of speech. In 17 states, cyberbullying is a criminal offense, and in the other states, it is not protected by free speech. Explicit content is also an exception to freedom of the press. Since my proposals only affect these 3 outliers, freedom of speech and the press will not be infringed, and I have disproved my opponent's 2 claims. My opponent also mentions in her second argument that social media companies are already regulating efficiently. However, they're only really regulating disinformation and maybe a bit of explicit content. Cyberbullying is not being regulated. 12% of Facebook users and 11.4% of Twitter users report being cyberbullied. When the government arrests cyberbullies, other bullies will not have the freedom they have today, and cyberbullying numbers will go down. Unlike the government, social media companies do not have the right to find and arrest bullies. This is why government regulation will be more effective than the current regulations.
And that is the time. Rhea, would you like to use any of your 2 minutes?
Yes. Can I use 1 minute 50?
1 minute 50 or 15?
1 minute 50.
All right, 1 minute and 50 seconds. I'll notify you when it's passed.
Thank you.
You can see here that Rhea and Tanae are taking very different strategies with their prep time for this debate. Tanae has saved all 2 minutes for his closing speech, while Rhea is planning on using almost all of her 2 minutes for this first speech and saving a little bit for the end. That's 1 minute and 50 seconds.
Okay. So the first argument that my opponent said was that freedom of speech wasn't that really relevant with my speech, and I disagree because freedom of speech is very important, and freedom of speech has to do with only the good. Like, I agree with my opponent said that, but that's not what I said in my speech. What I said in my speech was it takes away the freedom of speech because people feel like they cannot say what they believe because the government is overpowering. It has so much power that it scares people. And when the government comes in, they also the government job is not to scare people. Their job is to help the US and help with all the problems that go on. But do you think regulating something that doesn't need it and just causing more harm makes sense? Also, according to Hootsuite, Facebook and Twitter have been doing a better job than the government and other sources and other sites than with their own company. Also, sites don't need the government because they own the company. They have more power to control the company over the government. Thank you.
All right. Now we're ready to prepare for the final closing speeches of the afternoon. Tanae, would you like to use any of your 2 minutes of prep time?
I'd like to use all of it.
All right. You're welcome to all of it. 2 minutes are on the clock waiting for you.
Yep. I'm ready to do my conclusion speech.
All right. There's 1 minute on the clock.
Okay. Let us look at the bigger picture. Government regulations will do more good than harm, right? I feel that first I should win, anyways, because in my refutation, I disproved her two main claims. Freedom of speech will not be infringed because going back to her reputation, freedom of speech will not be infringed because freedom of speech isn't how you feel. It's whether you can say what you want. You will be able to say what you want in my proposed government regulations. Let's also look back to cyberbullying. Not once in her reputation did she mention the pro side of cyberbullying. My cyberbullying argument stands, and I feel that I should go back to the statistics of 11.4% of Twitter users and 12% of Facebook users report being cyberbullied, which means that even though they're regulating some stuff, they're not regulating cyberbullying efficiently, which the government can do. She also mentioned they're flagging content, but
that's time.
Please vote for pro because they're not pulling it down and people are still reading it.
All right, Ria, would you like to use your remaining 10 seconds?
Yes.
Clock starts now. And that's 10 seconds.
Okay. Are you ready tonight?
Yes.
Okay. I would like to start off my speech saying that government regulation does more harm than good. Government regulation can lead to bankruptcy because people feel like they cannot share what they believe. Government regulation does take away freedom of speech and freedom of press. I would like to share an analogy. If you are in school with a table full of kids and a teacher comes over to the table and you are talking and you probably will stop talking. The teacher is like the authority or the government. You don't feel as comfortable speaking in front of them. It is the same thing as government regulation. People feel scared to share what their beliefs are in front of the government. Judge, I urge you to vote con. Thank you.
And thank you to both Tanae and to Ria for that debate. And to all of the other debaters that we've had this afternoon presenting as well. I know that I can tell you that Adrienne and I are exceedingly proud of what you just saw, parents, for all 5 of those debates. And I really think that what you've watched was a testament to just what has been done, or just how much has been done over the past 5 days. And to all of the students who have been with Adrienne and I for the past week, I want to let you know that we are proud of every single one of you. We are absolutely excited and ecstatic to see everything that you've done this afternoon and even this morning when we were debating. I know that there have been many challenges for some of you. There have been struggles with technical difficulties. There have been struggles with your own personal tendency to maybe be afraid of public speaking, or maybe even challenges that you faced in trying to figure out how to write or trying to figure out how to express your ideas. But to each and every one of you, I want to let you know that I hope that this is not the end of your experience with debate, because all of you should continue in this activity. You're all prepared to move on and to continue building your skills, to continue practicing. And if any of you happen to be interested in continuing your debate time into Debate 301 next week or later this summer, or into Club League with us during the school year, I would absolutely love to see all of you continue in that way, and maybe even have the chance to be with some of you in Club League in the fall. Well, parents, that is going to conclude our awards program and our showcase for this afternoon. I hope you've enjoyed what you've seen. I hope you've been encouraged by your children's accomplishments, and I hope that you have been inspired by everything that they have done over the past several days. As I wind the webcast down here, I want to remind you to take that parent survey to give your feedback on how you think things have gone, and to share your thoughts with us so that we can keep serving you and your families better next time. And of course, if you would like more information about things that we can do to help you and to serve you and your family through our other offerings, reach out to team@capitaldebate.com, or you can call our main office phone number as well, and we can get someone on the line to speak with you and give you more concrete information. But that's going to do it for this afternoon. I'm going to officially declare this session of Debate 201 over. It was a joy to have you all with us this week. Students, if you'll make sure that you fill out that survey if you didn't this morning, and I would absolutely love to see all of you in the future.